Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the continued reopening roundtable conversation for Connecticut preschool and kindergarten administrators. My name is Rosie O'Brien Wojtek, and I'm an Assistant Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Schools. We at CAS are very excited to collaborate with the Office of Early Childhood, the Connecticut State Department of Education, and the Regional Education Service Center's RESC Alliance to support the needs of all of Connecticut's youngest learners, including children with special needs and other vulnerable populations, by sharing with you the most current information, as well as research and best practices for early childhood education. There's so much to think about this year as we design and implement teaching and learning during this 2021 school year, especially for our youngest students across the state. So we're really glad that you're here with us today. Just a couple of quick reminders. First of all, everyone has been muted to begin with, but once you get into the breakout rooms, please unmute yourself to talk with each other. If possible, please turn your video on, as it's nice to be able to see everyone, especially when we're working in small groups. When we're working as a whole group, you may ask questions in the chat or raise your hand with the button at the bottom of the screen to be recognized. Please use the chat feature to ask questions, share ideas, and let us know if you experience any technical problems during the Zoom meeting, as we will be monitoring the chat. However, when you're in the breakout rooms, the chat feature is only seen by the people in your breakout room. So if you have questions or you need help when you're in the breakout room, please use the help button and one of the hosts will respond. This webinar is being recorded, but only during the whole group activities. We're unable to record the small group conversations during the breakout room portion of the webinar. However, the rest of the webinar will be recorded and will be posted for future viewing. So please be sure to share the link to this webinar with your colleagues once it's posted on the CAS, OEC, CSDE, and RESC websites. Again, I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for this continued roundtable conversation, East Con Early Childhood Specialist, Anne-Marie Davidson. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Good morning, everyone. I do personally want to thank you for being here. I know that the events in the last almost year have really been significant. They've had a significant impact on our educational system. And I know that one of the things, again, that has been impacted is time. So I really, really appreciate that you have taken the time to join us today and taken some of that really precious time to come and have this conversation with us today about specially designed instruction and supporting young children with IEPs in schools. So because, let's see, we already have technology. There we go. So because we recognize that things have really changed and shifted in the last year, we just wanted to start out by checking in and take a little pulse of the group and also to remind ourselves that it's important for children, for young children. I do a lot of training around social emotional development. And it's important for young children to be able to be connected and be able to identify their feelings. But it's also important for us as adults to be able to do that. So to start out today, we just kind of wanted to pause, take a deep breath, think about right now, how are you feeling? Might be feeling like one of these cookies, or you might be feeling something different. But we also wanted to give us all a moment to answer a little poll to just take the pulse of all of our audience today to see how everybody is feeling. So Jean, if you would launch the poll for us. So go ahead, hopefully you're seeing a poll on your screen. Go ahead and answer that poll. Okay, so let's take a look at our results. That's really significant, isn't it? I hope that I put that last answer in there sort of as a joke, right? Because that's the reality. I think a lot of us feel like we have spent so much time and have put so much cognitive time and energy into analyzing what needs to change and how it needs to change. And that's what's reflected in that poll. And anytime that we have to go through that new learning, anytime we go through new learning, it really has an impact on our stress level And usually though, we get to deal with little pieces of change. And if we look at our poll results, it really shows us that people are feeling like so much, almost everything that we are responsible for in our professional role has shifted or changed in some way in the last almost year. And that's really significant. So we want to, again, recognize that. And we want to make sure that everybody knows how significant it is that you're here today to have this conversation with us. Having said that, we are going to ask you to reflect today on a really specific piece of our job and our role with children, and that is related to instruction. And so I know you've done the 10,000 foot view of everything that needs to change, and then you've honed in and narrowed down onto really small pieces. And that's really what we're going to do today. We're going to get down to having conversations about specially designed instruction. We'll have some small group discussion, which will give you an opportunity to have those smaller conversations with your colleagues. We'll come back together. We're going to talk specifically about using an implementation plan. Then you'll go back out and have some additional small group discussion, and then we'll come back together and wrap it up and move on to our talk about next steps. Again, as I said, our format today is a little bit different than the last two roundtables in that we're going to have some content review, and that mostly is in place so that everybody kind of has a level playing field or the same information to inform your small group discussion. For some of you, it will be review, and for some of you, it might be new learning. So feel free to share that when you get into your small group discussion, and certainly to ask each other questions and use each other as resources during those discussions. Okay, let's see. All right, so one of the things that we are responsible for in education, right, is instruction. And when we think about our purpose, right, when we boil it down to our very, very basic purpose, the purpose of schools is to provide students with learning experiences so that they can obtain a benefit. And that cuts across grade level, that cuts across, right, subject area, content area. That really is our basic purpose, right? In order to benefit from those learning experiences, students have to be able to access and participate in those learning experiences. That is a really basic, again, simple definition of education and a simple definition of the instructional equation, right? When, as we just looked at the poll, when we realize, right, that things have significantly changed in the way that we do things, this is certainly one of the places that has really, really shifted, right? How students access those learning experiences has been affected. How they participate in those learning experiences has been affected, right? And we really, the jury's still sort of out. We're really hoping that the benefit hasn't been affected, but there is a possibility that we are going to find out that through all of these changes, students haven't gained as much benefit as they typically would, right? When we start thinking about special education and specially designed instruction, the truth of it is that we can't start to have that conversation unless we anchor it in general education, unless we anchor it in instruction that all students receive, right? So we really need to begin this conversation around special education and around specially designed instruction, thinking about instruction for all students and thinking about general education curriculum. The reason for that approach, or the reason that we need to start with that, is again, all anchored in what the purpose of special education is. Special education, there's lots of different analogies and lots of different pictures, graphics of what that represents special education. But really, I like the bridge idea because to me, right, similar to this instructional equation, we want all students to obtain a benefit. What happens when we have a student that's been identified as having a disability and needing an IEP is that our job in special education is to understand that child's individual needs and to build that bridge between where they are and getting them to that benefit that's identified through our standards and identified through our curriculum. That's special education's purpose. The purpose is to create supports and strategies that allow students with IEPs to access and participate in instruction so that they can obtain a benefit. Our job is to understand those children's individual needs, to analyze what those needs are, to understand where they are in relation to the general ed curriculum, and then to put intentional strategies and supports in place in order to support their access and their participation in learning experiences so that they can obtain a benefit. It's represented in the law, right? We know that. We've looked at this before. 6 principles of IDEA. First principle is free, appropriate public education. And it's further defined to articulate that it's their special ed programs are there to support students to make progress in the general ed curriculum. So again, we can think about it this way. We can think about it in a picture form in terms of special ed's job is to get children across that bridge to that benefit, just like it is for every other student. We can think about it this way, more in words, and understand that this equation doesn't shift, doesn't change for children with IEPs, but we need to add or process, evaluate, and provide those supports that will help them be able to access and participate. One of the other pieces of special education law, the thing that actually is a requirement. So once we've said, yes, this is a student who has a disability, requires an IEP, the piece of that we have to guarantee that's happening is specially designed instruction. So this is the definition from the law of specially designed instruction. But again, right, we know we can adapt content, methodology, and delivery of instruction. But again, the purpose of doing that is to support access to the general ed curriculum. Okay. Before we go out into our first breakout, this is the last piece that I wanted to leave you with. And this is important as we start to plan or reevaluate what we're doing for young children with disabilities, young children who have IEPs. In the current context that we're in, it's important for us to recognize that for preschool age children within IDEA, the general ed curriculum is defined more broadly as developmentally appropriate activities. So we now have children who are participating in education at home and receiving their instruction remotely, right, with a parent who's facilitating that learning or who are engaged in activities and routines throughout their entire day. Well, those are developmentally appropriate activities. We have children who may be sitting in community-based early childhood programs and not coming into the school district-based preschool program. And those children are also engaged in developmentally appropriate activities throughout their day. And so we need to recognize that, again, for preschool age children, we are defining general ed curriculum in this way. And so when we start to think about applying specially designed instruction in order to help them access and participate in the general ed curriculum, for preschool children, that opens up a whole new host of opportunities and maybe is going to be a shift in terms of how we think about when and where and how we provide specially designed instruction to support their growth and development toward their IEP goals and objectives. Okay, so we are going to go into small groups, but I wanted to just pause here. Is there anybody who has a question about special ed or specially designed instruction or a comment about what we just shared what I just shared. If you do, you can go ahead and use the raise your hand feature, and we can unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask that question or make that comment. Okay, doesn't look like it, right? Am I correct? Yes, I will check.
Yeah, Emery, you're all set. There's,
Okay.
I didn't see anyone raising their hands or.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, sort of when we opened, that today is an opportunity for you to reflect. We completely understand school year is off to a start, and you had to make decisions about providing services to children with IEPs, and you had to make decisions about providing specially designed instruction and how that was going to get done. And you made those decisions based on your school's model, then based on what parents chose to do with children. So again, we understand school has gotten off the ground and you had to make those decisions and things have already been put in place. What we wanted to do today was give you an opportunity, because we've never done this before, for you to be able to reflect on what's been put in place, supplemented with a little bit of background information or a review of information, so that then you could have some discussions with each other about specially designed instruction within your district, within your program, within your setting, and what pieces of what we just talked about are in place. What does it look like? And as you're starting to sort of reevaluate or think about how you've been doing things, are there things that you think you might need to adjust or change? When we come back from our small groups, we'll do a little debrief, and then we are going to talk about the use of implementation plans and how we get to an implementation plan. So I'll just put that out there because that might be something that you start to talk about in this small group, but we are going to get there after this, okay? So once you get your invitation to your small group, take note of the number of the group that you're in, because I'll be calling on small groups to share out, and I'll use your number to identify you. And then when you get into your small group, just identify someone who's going to be the reporter. And what you're doing during your discussion really is around how is SDI being addressed or implemented for preschoolers and kindergartners in your district. But you can use those questions as prompts if you have other things that you prefer to discuss, or if your discussion goes in a different direction, that's completely okay. All right. So Jean, if you want to go ahead and send out our breakout room invitations. Is everybody back, Jean?
Yes, it looks like
Okay.
everyone's back.
All right, great. So let's see, I'm going to just call on, how many groups did we have, Jean?
We
Sorry.
had 6 rooms.
Okay, so I'm just going to randomly call on a few of our breakout rooms and ask you to share sort of just what was your discussion about, what was at least one thing that you guys identified that you wanted to share with us as part of the large group discussion. So how about breakout room 3? And you are probably muted, so.
Anne Marie, we forgot to designate a spokesperson.
That's, I think in the group I was actually in, we also forgot to designate a spokesperson, so.
So, I mean, I can share, and I'm sure somebody else can chime in, but we used that opportunity in the breakout to really share what our return to school looked like.
Yep.
And talked about, you know, actually, most of us are back in on 5 days, all kids, and talked about the challenges of remote learning for preschoolers, and that we were trying to avoid that at all costs.
Right.
You know, trying to bring more families back in, feel comfortable. So that was kind of our overall, we all shared out.
Right. Yeah, because, right, we talked about some of those shifts, access has shifted and participation has shifted, but something that hasn't shifted is the age, the developmental level of children in preschool and kindergarten. And the reality is that, yeah, learning with a screen in front of you is really not, it's difficult for people in general, but it's really difficult for young children. Right. So, right. So if we can prevent that, that would be great. Okay, thank you. How about group 5?
I'll talk for group 5. And hi, Emery. Nice to see you.
Nice.
And sorry, I chatted everyone when I was responding to Rosie. And then, so sorry about that.
It's okay.
So we talked similarly about the same process of how we're re-entering and how things have been going. Our group was made up of an interesting dynamic of me, Bristol, Waterbury, and then small districts like Avon and Region 1, which none of us really even knew where that was. So the way that each district is handling it is truly based on their population. So Region 1 is back in full time doing everything, where then you come to Waterbury or Bristol and we're easing our way back in. I think most of us said that for pre-K, we have made the exception in district that the pre-K kids are coming more often than the K-12 kids, which is great to hear that that's happening in other districts. The biggest concern we had is, again, the virtual learners. There's really no way to meet their needs virtually. We can try our hardest. We can do our Zoom meetings, we can do our small group, and we can instruct the parents and coach the parents. And it's a great opportunity for those things to be happening. But in terms of any interaction, it just is very difficult. And even in the classroom, with all the barriers we have in place, with the not sharing of toys, with the social distancing, with the keeping everybody in their own areas, it's really defeating so much of what we've always been so proud of in pre-K, is that beginning learning, socialization, making friends, sharing. We're just kind of knowing we're going in a really bad direction, and it's concerning.
Right. Right. And I think that when I was saying to somebody, right, that really everything has had to be reevaluated and changed and adjusted. And when we make change, just like in right teaching, we want the opportunity to go back and think about things more, but you have to do something first and look at how it's going. And I think, I don't know how you guys feel, but I think that's sort of where I feel like we're at. So, and again, that was sort of the purpose of today, and specifically looking at specially designed instruction, but all of those pieces, absolutely. How do we encourage play? If kids still need to be sitting at opposite ends of the table, how do we encourage social interaction now that we have to have a tape line on in our block area, right? So it's refining that stuff as we start to move through, still needing to have those other safety pieces in place, and still try and figure out ways to encourage what we are all about.
And can I just ask a question? I didn't get a chance to respond to Kristen in our group because we got pulled back about some of those things in place in her program with the social distancing and the not sharing of toys. And I'm curious how everyone else is handling that, because I know like in our program, you know, we really kind of stuck to the OEC guidelines that came out in like June, and then it has evolved a little bit with CSDE over the last couple months. But you know, we are still sharing, you know, toys in centers. We've just really upped our cleaning, you know, and we've, you know, distanced as best we can for snack time and nap time and going head to toe and all of that kind of thing. But we tried to really have our program be as close to you know, what we would expect of an early childhood program as we could, you know, really ramping up the cleaning and, you know, masks and all of that stuff. But a lot of those elements we still have in our program. So I'm wondering, are those elements still in other people's programs, or is the majority kind of more what it sounds like Kristen's program is doing?
Do other people want to respond to that program?
I'm happy to respond to that, Tiffany. My name's Samantha Straker. I'm the acting principal at Wittenberry Early Childhood Magnet School. Our program sounds similar to yours. We've done some of the same things where we've really ramped up the cleaning. We also rotate materials. So we have, instead of like one box of Legos out, our classrooms will have maybe 4 smaller boxes. So after a couple kids play, if two are playing together with one, we can take that box out and rotate it with a clean box. So that way we have kind of that embedded into some cleaning protocols that we have throughout the day. We also use a lot of individualized materials whenever it's appropriate. An example is, like we would use like individual rollers if we're using Play-Doh, individual bags of Play-Doh. And then when the kid puts their Play-Doh bag away, a teacher just quick uses a 1-minute sanitization wipe and wipes the Play-Doh roller down. So we kind of have some built-in systems to up the cleanliness. And then we really took an extra effort to have cohorted materials. So we keep all of our groups of kids with the same materials, and there's no crossing of materials unless they get thoroughly cleaned and sanitized before going into a different cohort group.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Andrea, did you want to add anything to the conversation?
And I'm going to ask Michelle Levy is here too, so I'm going to ask her to unmute too. So Michelle and I are actually working on a brief video about just this topic. And what we're really encouraging is a lot of the practices that we're hearing here, where we're asking people to think about layering mitigation strategies. So we know that young children still need to share and they still need to experience collaborative play opportunities. Those are learning experiences for them, and they have to actually learn those skills through these play experiences. So there are times when it's appropriate to socially distance, and when it's appropriate and when you're able to do that. But there are many circumstances where it's okay, given certain mitigation strategies, to have children interact with each other. To have, maybe you need to limit the amount of children in a center, but they're still interacting with a particular material. The block area is the first thing that comes to mind, because I can't imagine having more than one set of unit blocks. That just wouldn't be feasible. You wouldn't have space and it would be too expensive, but still allowing children to be able to do that. And then having a cleaning routine with regard to those materials. And we know some materials are more likely to need more cleaning, hard surfaces as opposed to books. They would need more cleaning. So I love that I'm hearing that we're seeing some of that layering of mitigation strategies, because we need to keep these interactive experiences for young children when they're in our early learning programs. Michelle, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
I think you said a lot of it, Andrea. I agree. Andrea and I have been working on toward a video related to this, as she said, and trying to really ensure that mitigation strategies are in place, but that they work together. So now that children are wearing masks in programs, that perhaps makes the social distancing, while we want to keep that when it's appropriate, we have another layered mitigation strategy because children are wearing masks, so that that comes into play. The one piece that I didn't hear in the conversations was how hand washing can also play a role. So if children are sharing materials after that activity, having them wash their hands and promoting that is another layered mitigation strategy that can be helpful.
There are,
So
and there are
just-
some materials that I see in the chat box, Martha said, that you can have individual packages of certain materials, and that works really, really well for some materials. So back to my unit block example, it would not work for unit blocks.
So I don't want it to sound like we've got kids, totally isolated from each other. It's not like that. But we have the barriers up on the tables. They can see each other through the barriers. So they can engage with each other while they're doing their own 10 frame activity, or while they're doing their own drawing activity. But they all, I think Tiffany or somebody said this, they all do have their own bags, which have, their crayons, their scissors, their all of those. And then each morning we try to assign a bucket of toys to each child, and that's sort of their toys to engage with. They can sit on the floor next to a peer and engage alongside of them. as we know, most 3-year-old students with special needs don't do that anyway. So it's, trying to encourage that, just any kind of interaction. So we're not like, the police, but we definitely are not sharing materials. We're not allowing, if a child is playing with a truck on the ground, another child to go pick up the truck and take it and, whatever it might be.
Great. Sally, I saw your hand raised. Did you want to add to the conversation?
Sure. So I saw Andrea's greeting to all of us who are part of the pre-K to 3 continuum work. And it was interesting because Emily, who's on here as well, my colleague who is the principal of pre-K to grade 1, her kindergarten classrooms look very different from preschool. And so, I let Emily share, how sad that was to see happen, because, preschool, we're looking at obviously early childhood guidelines, but kindergarten is always looking at the K to 12. And so the mitigating strategies that we're talking about layering, is that, I don't know if kindergarten and first grade are doing that as well. I know in our district, Emily, it looks different in your building, right?
It does. Sadly, we have single desks right now. They were brought out of the basement. So we no longer are using a lot of our flexible seating that was within our classrooms. All of our carpets and rug areas have been rolled up and put away. Every desk has a desk shield on it. So that's presented a lot of problems for our early learners. To me, it cuts down visibility and it's very hard to hear behind those shields. Our kids are wearing masks. Our teachers are wearing masks and face shields as well. So multiple layers of protection for sure. And as Kristen, I think, was pointing out, we also do have individual materials for every one of our students. So a lot of that sharing and interaction has really gone away. And at KCS, we have implemented purposeful play, and that's presented a challenge because that's all about collaboration. So we really have been trying to navigate that as well.
So I just bring that up in case there's any guidance when the State Department of Ed is thinking about early childhood being not just pre-K, it's K to 2, right? So just throwing that out there.
I think, yeah, no, it's true. I think though, again, it's sort of, to me, part of what we've already talked about, that's the point that we're at in this year, right? We've done some stuff. We've done a lot of things. And now really thinking about going back to like that instructional sequence, which we can apply to lots of things, social development, right? Content areas, and thinking about what is the benefit that we have always wanted to achieve, needed to achieve, depending on grade level, and what has to change, what has to shift, and what hasn't changed. And again, for our very youngest learners, developmentally, they haven't changed, right? And so we now are in the process of needing to observe, assess, evaluate our strategies, and really think about what is having an impact on all of the benefit that we want children to obtain from being in school. And perhaps there's some adjustment that needs to happen. Again, maintaining safety. And I think often in history, when something big happens, right, we have sort of an all or nothing approach. And then eventually we get to that layering of strategies, right? We start to realize that really the best approach is using, again, using strategies at different times, at different levels, depending on what's happening or what the need is. So, I'm not sure what just happened. So hold on. Where this one?
In monitoring the chat room, which I can do right now, Anne Marie,
Yes.
It seems as though many programs do have the layering of mitigation strategies as well as cohorting. And also there is a resource in the chat room to the State Department of Education's guidance So that's important for everyone to know. Thank you, Suzanne, for sharing that.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to starting to talk about implementation plans. And again, maybe a strategy that you guys are already using to support the provision of specially designed instruction for children with IEPs during this time. I know in our small group, and I think Sally, you mentioned, it seems like most preschool and kindergarten classrooms are back in the building 5 days or moving to that in the next couple of weeks. So there are some examples in the next few slides that we're going to go through that look at an implementation plan for remote learning. They look at an implementation plan for providing SDI at home to a child who's at home. And so those may not be relevant to you, but the process that we move through to get to an implementation plan related to specially designed instruction can be applied regardless of whether the child is in the classroom, is at home, or is a combination of both, or in a community-based setting. And we also, I know in our small group, somebody said that, you know, the provision, the use of specially designed instruction, even pre-COVID, was something that was an area of needed growth. So whether, again, wherever you're at in terms of the model that you're using or what you're moving to, just think about how this process could be applied, again, specific to supporting children with IEPs and specially designed instruction. So I wanted to pause here for a little public service announcement. Maybe that's the wrong term, but there are these things out there called the DEC recommended practices. DEC stands for the Division for Early Childhood, for people who don't know, and I apologize if I'm saying something everybody knows already. It is a sub unit of the Council for Exceptional Children, which is the professional organization for special education, special educators. And so DEC is the early childhood piece of CEC. They developed these things called recommended practices, which are evidence-based practices to help support teachers who teach very young children with disabilities. One of those buckets of recommended practice is around instruction. And so I wanted to share, first of all, that resource with you. And on the last slide of our PowerPoint, there's a link to the DEC recommended practices. And so I wanted to share that with you. But again, specifically, I wanted to share the instructional practices because obviously we're talking about specially designed instruction, but also because as we start to have these conversations about what are the things that have shifted in instruction and what are the things that haven't shifted, again, age, developmental level hasn't shifted. These practices, this practice, naturalistic instruction, is an evidence-based practice that's identified in the DEC recommended practices, and embedded instruction are two practices that can support 3, 4, and 5-year-olds in the way that they learn and can be applied in multiple contexts, right? Because now we have kids sort of doing lots of different things and in lots of different places receiving their instruction. And these two practices really work well, again, related to our developmental level and related to being able to be applied in multiple contexts. All right, so how do we get to an implementation plan? Basically, flow chart, right? We start with an IEP. And again, we've already talked about and established that the purpose of special education is all about analyzing where is this child within general ed, within the general ed outcomes and curriculum. What is it about this child's individual needs that I need to support in order to help them achieve or access and participate in that general ed curriculum? And that's what the IEP should help us answer. Where is the child and what do they need to get to those goals? So we start with the IEP. We then can use something called an embedded activity matrix. Then we move into something called a decision-making guide. And ultimately we end up with an implementation plan. So here's just to walk us through this process. Here is a sample goal and objective from an IEP. And there's been a lot of conversation about social interaction and the need for kids to learn social skills. So oddly enough, our example is somewhat related to that, right? So we're going to work with a child, Anne-Marie, I don't have any trouble with verbal interaction, as you can see, but Miss Anne Marie does not initiate verbal interaction with her peers. So she has a goal and objectives. She would have multiple objectives, but goal and objective written about that. And so we're going to take that objective of initiating a verbal interaction with a peer. And when we use an embedded activity matrix, the first thing we do is we look at the general ed routine or schedule. We look at the opportunities for learning that all children engage in. So this form starts to put all of those pieces of general ed and what is special ed supposed to do together in one place. This happens to be an early childhood classroom schedule. It could be replaced with a home routine. It could be replaced with a kindergarten schedule. It actually could be replaced with a high school schedule as well. After you've established, right, what is the general ed expectation or what's the routine, then we start to think about what objective, what need does this child have that's been established through asking those questions during the development of the IEP. And then we ask ourselves, does this need, this area of difficulty, prevent this child from accessing and participating in the learning opportunities that exist during arrival, right? Because kids are engaged in growth and development opportunities during arrival. And one of those things that they start to do is they start to interact with their peers. They talk to each other. They say, hi. They say, I like your coat. They say, what do you have for lunch today, right? And those are all growth, those are all growth opportunities. So does this need impact Anne Marie's ability to access and participate and therefore gain benefit from arrival? Yes. During snack? Yes. Morning meeting? Not so much. We really are not encouraging conversation during morning meeting. That's a teacher directed time. Okay, centers? Yes. All right. So again, that first question is, does this need impact access and participation and therefore have the possibility of impacting benefit? Right there, what do you have in front of you, right? You already know, here's where I need to support this child. Here's where I need to apply special education, instruction, accommodation. There were several questions too. I was thinking about this in the registration about meeting service time. And sometimes I'll just say on an IEP, right? If the purpose of special education is around specially designed instruction, and we write an IEP that says the child is receiving special education for 2 or 3 hours a day, once we complete this with the goal of the goals that children are working on, we start to see that they're not getting specially designed instruction. They don't need to get specially designed instruction during every minute of their program. So it just sometimes helps us think about how we identify service amount. All right, so that's the sample embedded activity matrix. And then, as we said, right, then the next thing we move into is we start to think about the individual child's needs. And again, getting more narrowed down to what do we need to do to support access and participation during arrival, snack, and center. And that's what this is for. So it's sort of like just a series of graphic organizers for moving from, because an IEP is just a list of goals, right? It doesn't tell us how to get to those goals. That's what this process tells us. So we've said that access and participation during snack is affected, right? Part of why it's affected is because the goal for all children during snack, right? This is general ed curriculum. The goal for all children during snack is that they will engage in conversation. We ask ourselves a couple of more questions which ultimately lead to identifying our specially designed instruction. Okay. The next place we go to, this is a sample implementation plan for classroom schedule again. And so we take that objective and we have identified during arrival, we're going to provide a verbal prompt. During snack, we're going to take that information from the decision-making guide, put that in here, right? And then this, obviously, children have more than one objective. This is an example for a different objective that's on Anne Marie's IEP. This is an example for remote learning, right? Same objective. We're going to do group snack remotely. We still have welcome and greeting during our group snack. I can still provide a prompt. Here's what starts to shift, right? And I think, Kristen, you mentioned coaching, right? So one of the other shifts that we might need to think about during this time is that our interactions may be less with children and more with families. And that obviously raises a need for people to maybe learn a whole new set of skills. Coaching is not necessarily something that classroom teachers are really, really good at because they haven't had to do it. So I have coached, I've had Zoom time with just the parent. And we've talked about how to use conversation cards to support Anne Marie's verbal interactions. And then I have one-on-one time with Anne Marie where I am pre-teaching her how to use those conversation cards. This example is for a child who may be entirely at home, right? It's flipped around. I apologize for that. I should have created one and continued with our example. So the schedule is down the side and the child's goals are across the top. But still, right, there's an application of behavior based on the goal during this routine. So again, it's a shift in thinking about who is providing the instruction. But when we think about our definition of, especially for preschool children, that general ed curriculum is developmentally appropriate activities and experiences, for this child who's at home, learning at home, these are developmentally appropriate experiences and activities. They're growth and development producing activities. That's their general ed curriculum right now. So we could have taken Anne Marie's goals of initiating conversation with peers, and we could have, again, talked about, is there some instruction that could have been applied at wake up time, at breakfast? Maybe I'm still playing with cousins and peers in the neighborhood. Okay, somebody, Tiffany, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing all of these charts. And I could say that we use something similar in my district. It was called the IEP Infused Matrix, but very similar with the gen ed and the goals. And it has been really helpful over the years to figure out that service time and how much specialized instruction everyone actually, requires. I kind of wanted to ask a question about, this kind of plan you have in place right now that's on the screen, because the state has said that if parents are in that voluntary remote, cohort that, they said like it's not meant to be like a one-to-one exchange of the school day and everything. So it kind of does lend itself to like, okay, parents, you definitely have to really take it on. But then at the same time, I've been on a call with our bureau chief, Brian Klemkowitz, and he said, for if it's hybrid learning or if it's, a mandatory closure remote learning, they really expect the implementation plan to really just mirror the IEP, like same frequency of services and all of that stuff. So I'm just wondering if there's any, guidance or anything in terms of if it's not in that voluntary mode, but like a full school closure or the whole state closure like last year, or a hybrid situation, do we still have that flexibility in terms of implementing that service in that way?
So could you do something like this, right? Is that what you're asking? Is that the flexibility you're talking about?
Well, I guess I'm just
or-
talking about the two different, like, the guidance, the addendum from the state that talked about the parents who are in that voluntary remote kind of category that, obviously we're implementing IEPs and everything, but the state put a lot of really clear language in there about, it's not a one-to-one exchange of what the school day is. This is your choice. It's not, going to be the same. And you are responsible for being like an implementer and supporting your kids' education. So they were really clear on that. So
Yep.
like,
Okay, so it's the other situation.
yeah, for the other situation, and I mean, that conference, that call I was on with the bureau chief was probably in like the beginning, mid-August, when they came out with that template for the implementation plans. And he was like, it needs to be pretty much like that one, pretty much like the IEP. So, and so I'm wondering if we have that, like if we went to a full district closure and pre-K, do we have that same type of flexibility to have parents be as big of a part and do, that kind of model? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think so. I'm going to respond, and then I'm going to ask Andrea to fix my mistakes if I have for the ones that I have made. I think that, so this is not a full implementation plan in that you can, again, as you said, we can start to sort of add up, right, how much service. And we can also start to embed data collection opportunities, right? And in coaching with families, that's part of what those conversations can include, so that we really have a good, we have documentation that we are in fact implementing specially designed instruction. The implementer is the parent, and this child is getting as many opportunities to receive specially designed instruction accommodations as they can. So I think that as long as we, and as long as we're able to document benefit and progress, right? No one is going to come back and say that things weren't done well if the child has made progress. I personally have a bias that says, I think there's a greater likelihood that children will make more progress when we give them more opportunities to be supported than if we are just having a 20-minute Zoom in the morning, 20-minute Zoom in the afternoon, midday and 20-minute Zoom in the afternoon. And I think that, again, those opportunities don't yield as good of a benefit because of the developmental issues that we're dealing with preschoolers and kindergartners. So I think, but I understand. But if we can document it and we're showing progress as well, I think that's our key. Not that there aren't a lot of things we need to do, because that means, again, building collaborations with families. It means talking with them about what does your day look like. All of those things have to occur. All right, Andrea, you're up.
I have nothing to correct in what you said, Anne Marie. I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think the big issue there is as you mentioned toward the end, is the family's context. So when this is not voluntary and parents are, not agreeing to, this is the situation I'm planning on and I'm choosing this situation, you may get families who this just doesn't fit in their context. It just doesn't. And I think just as Anne Marie said, if you can show educational benefit, you have a defensible position that if the child is on an IEP and they're supposed to get, their goals and objectives, their specialized instruction for anything in the cognitive area, 4 times a week for, 90 minutes, and you're doing it differently and it's documented on the plan, I think that's okay that you've made that alteration, but you're still giving them that access. I think when what we bump into is that and I think Tiffany, that's a really good point, we bump into issues when the parent's context doesn't fit the situation. And I don't have an answer for that. I think that being able to have the conversation with the family to say, so what is your context? let's see how we can plan together to make this work better. And I don't know where there's a perfect answer. I was on the phone with a parent day before yesterday who was completely freaking out because they chose remote implementation, but then something changed in their work situation and the child is staying home with a non-English speaking grandparent. And they're having a great deal of difficulty with the implementation. So not only are parents not voluntarily being put certain times in a situation, sometimes their contexts change. So I think everything that we do goes back to collaboration and good communication with families, because that's where I think the biggest complaints happen, is when parents aren't part of the planning and it's just assumed that they can do certain things when sometimes they just can't. So that isn't really a solution to the problem. It's just the reality.
Yes. And yes, I mean, if I was a parent and someone handed me something like this, I probably would tell them, no, thank you. So it was an example, but then again, that might be what a family is willing to do. So to reiterate Andrea's comment, and I think the same is true too. There have been conversations about children who are in community-based programs, and that's the same kind of conversation, right? We can't just expect that a community-based early childhood teacher is going to readily, every moment of every day, it has to be able to support children. We have to ask those questions, right? I know the transition to rest time in any community-based program I ever worked in as a consultant was not a time to start providing tons of individualized strategies to 3 different children. That was a rough time of day. Any other, I didn't notice anyone else's hand raised, but anyone else who has questions. And then I wanted to give you an opportunity to go back out into your breakout rooms, talk about what the process we just talked about. And again, there is, again, I just wanted to share this, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, right? We do have a form that is similar to what we just looked at in terms of an implementation plan. So, okay. All right, so we're gonna go back out our breakout rooms. We'll do about 10 minutes again, because then we'll come back together, have a very short sharing, and then we will wrap up for the morning. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So again, we are, let's see, okay, good. So we'll do the same thing. I'll just call on a couple of groups to share a little bit about your discussion. So how about group 2? Would you mind sharing?
So we talked actually a lot about documentation for the IEP implementation, especially virtually. What does that look like, and making sure that the documentation that we're recording is actually aligned to the IEP goals, and that it's research-based and purposeful and individualized. We're finding that sometimes the documentation being recorded is like, I called the family, they didn't pick up. I called the family, they need Wi-Fi. Whereas we kind of got to the level of, okay, that they need Wi-Fi, but there are other things that you can be doing. You have materials at home, you have pots and pans, you have paper, you might have crayons. If you don't, then that's things that we can help you with. But there's still an opportunity there to discuss, you know, always leaning towards strategies to support the teaching and learning of the individual child. Right. So that's what most of our conversation was about.
Great. And that's where the embedded instructional strategy and the naturalistic instructional strategies can really be, again, be really helpful in bridging that gap between, all right, what's your child already doing in their day? And how can I help you to help support them to achieve that goal, whatever that goal is, that, and like you said, and then that makes a really nice connection and provides you with that documentation that you need. Thank you for sharing. Group 4.
I can share for group 4. What we talked about was really those connections to families and communication. Now that you're not allowed to have families in the classroom, if you are having in-person teaching, and how to enhance those connections, because we understand how important those are. And also, building relationships with your families remotely, how that is critical. So there was a great suggestion that I think it was David who shared about hosting a parent whose child's birthday happens that week or that day, that parent being able to read a story or to be able to zoom into the classroom and make a connection with the child in the classroom. So I thought that was a great strategy of being able to look at other ways of connecting with families and bringing them into that school family.
Yes, right. And when we think about, again, collaborations, it's important. We have to think about lots of ways to be able to do that, because once we build that relationship, then we can again start to have those conversations about how do you support learning at home and still meet our obligations related to the IEP. Thank you.
Anne Marie, we had a question, the sample one that you showed, that was from Florida, I believe. It was the home one that gave you the example from home, that folks have been asking if you could put that, a link to that in the chat if possible.
Sure.
They
So
really like examples.
I just put a link to, it's not the exact embedded activity matrix, but it's a form, it's a Word document, and it basically has the same pieces. So I just put that one in the chat, but I will put the example home matrix in the chat as well before we wrap up. And if that doesn't work for you, you can always email me directly and I can send it to you. So we're almost done. Any other just overall comments, thoughts, questions, anything? Just unmute yourself and feel free to share.
So Anne Marie, I think Julia mentioned in our group, breakout group, that there'll be a follow-up to this for teachers. Are you going to talk about that before we end today?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other?
We just talked about the possibility of having a community of practice that allows us to do this work maybe this year, once a month. I know there was a community of practice last year where there was two times that we could meet. But this is great work, and it's going to take some time and effort. And I think it would be great if we could dedicate some time to all get together and continue the conversation, maybe on like a monthly basis.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you. All right, can somebody open that PDF that I just posted? Make sure it's the right, it's the right one. I don't always remember what those documents are called.
Yes, it is right.
Thank you. And then again, the sample planning matrix is just a blank Word doc. Well, except for I think it has a schedule across the top. You just delete that and put your own stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
And Anne Marie, people were asking if there's a way to have the PowerPoint connected with this. So if you can get us the PowerPoint, I know on the CAS website, when we post this, we can also post the PowerPoint so people have access to that as well.
Definitely. And I mentioned, sorry, those two. Do you see the PowerPoint on your screen now? I still mess this up sometimes.
Yep.
Okay, so those are the links to the DEC recommended practices. And then another amazing place, if people are not familiar with it, is the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. And they produced many resources to help with the implementation of the recommended practices. DEC has a few on their website, but ECTA has lots and lots of really wonderful resources related to implementing recommended practices. And so remember, there's a practice related to instruction. So you would find information on implementing naturalistic instruction and embedded instruction, as well as others. And yes, I'll share the PowerPoint, and then you would have those links.
And Also, Anne Marie, if Michelle and Andrea have a timeline for when they are going to share that resource that they're putting together, the work that they're working on, people would like to know when to expect that.
So pretty much the script is written and the visuals are ready, and we're just waiting for approvals above us to be able to go ahead and record. So that's my answer to soon, but I don't know exactly when.
And how will people be notified that it's available?
So what typically would happen is I will send it out as a link in the Bureau Bulletin. I will also send it out to my distribution list to everybody that has been identified as their preschool special ed contact. And feel free to share it beyond to whomever you think is appropriate to share with.
Okay. So we are planning a teacher forum. It's a statewide, it's open across the state through Zoom, that will essentially follow the same content and would share the same resources with teachers. Although our plan is to actually have them have access to an IEP so they could work in small groups, take their own objectives and work on developing an implementation plan based on their own goals and objectives for a student. But again, basically the content will be the same. And that date is, October 14th from 3 to 4. And yes, flyers will be going out soon, but you certainly could notify teachers to hold that date and time if that's something that you would like them to participate in.
You said October 14th or 13th? I'm sorry.
October 14th from 3 to 4 p.m.
Thank you.
And actually, that's another question. I mean, if we are done, if you need to go ahead and go, we have a terrible time thinking about time. What time does that time frame? Do you think that 3 to 4, does that work for teachers? Thumbs up, head nods. Yeah. Okay. And if you have thoughts about that, feel free to shoot one of us an email. But we were trying to figure out when would be the best time for teachers to be. There's never a great time. But that's the time we landed.
We're actually back about 3:30, starting at 3:30.
Okay.
We could do.
Yep.
We could certainly do that.
Right. You're still transitioning children. Departure is happening at 3. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that wraps up for today. I guess the other thing, one last thing, you will get a survey about today's roundtable. Please fill that out. We're always looking for input in terms of what our topics might be. So please feel free to share what would be helpful. If the format, also, if you liked the format, if that worked well. And we did look at your questions, your responses to your questions when you registered for this roundtable. And there definitely are some themes in there that we can continue to roll with. But again, let us know if there's anything else that would be helpful. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. It's almost Friday. Have a great day, everybody.